flight attendants were just finishing final checks when two uniformed airport security officers stepped onto the plane. They moved with practiced authority, scanning the rows like they were hunting for something or someone. Passengers glanced up, then quickly looked away. The way people do when trouble's coming, but they don't want to be part of it. In seat 8C sat a man quietly reading a paperback, posture straight, boots shined to a mirror finish. Retired Marine Darius Holt didn't look up until they stopped in front of him. "Sir, we're going to need you to come with us," one of them said. No explanation, no apology, just a command. Darius blinked once. "Why?" he asked calmly. The officer's jaw tightened. "There's been a seat reassignment." A lie. Everyone in earshot knew it. And just as the tension started to thicken, four men from the back of the cabin rose to their feet and changed everything. Darius Holt hadn't planned on wearing his dress blues, but his daughter had asked him to. "Just this once, Dad," she texted the night before. "I want everyone to know who my hero is." So he wore them, even if he didn't like the attention they drew. Darius was 52, a retired Marine with 25 years of service under his belt, most of it quiet, classified, and forgotten by everyone except the men he'd led. He wasn't flying for business or vacation. He was flying to keep a promise, to sit in the front row of his daughter's senior recital at Emory. She was the only child of his late wife, gone 5 years now, and everything he had left. He bought the ticket himself, declined the upgrade, and packed light. Just a carry-on and a creased photo of his daughter in pigtails holding a violin. No fanfare, no entourage. Just a father honoring a commitment. He walked with the posture of someone used to being underestimated. Quiet strength wrapped in a pressed uniform. The kind of man people often ignore until he has a reason to speak. But Darius didn't come here to speak. He came to listen, and to be present no matter what. The two security officers weren't police, but they carried themselves like they wanted to be. One was stocky, mid-30s, with a crew cut and the kind of stare that dared people to challenge him. His partner was younger, lanky, with restless energy and a name tag that read Reynolds. They stepped onto the plane like it belonged to them, eyes scanning with a mission. Passengers felt it shift in the air when something started to go sideways. The lead officer locked onto Darius almost immediately. "Sir, we need you to step off the aircraft," he said, voice low but unmistakably firm. Darius looked up, confused but calm. "Is there a problem with my seat?" The younger one glanced at the manifest, barely hiding his discomfort. "There's been a reassignment, sir. We need your cooperation." Darius pulled out his boarding pass. 8C, paid and confirmed. The reply was silence. No eye contact, no clarification, just pressure. That kind of pressure black men know all too well, the kind dressed up in uniforms and policy. Around them, eyes darted and heads turned, but no one said anything. Yet. The officers didn't know who they were speaking to, and they had no idea who else was watching. Darius didn't raise his voice. He didn't shift in his seat. He just held out his boarding pass again, slow and steady, his gaze locked on the man who'd asked him to leave. "I'm not moving," he said, not defiant, just certain. The guard hesitated, caught off guard by the stillness. Something about Darius unsettled him, not in a threatening way, but in the way still water unsettles someone who's never learned to swim. A few rows back, a man with a shaved head lowered his magazine. Another near the emergency exit uncrossed his arms. A third one by the window turned his head just slightly. They didn't look at each other. They didn't speak, but they noticed, and they remembered. Darius had once walked through sandstorms beside these men. He'd carried their wounded and buried their dead. They owed him nothing, and yet they owed him everything. No one stood yet. But the shift had started. The air was different now, heavy with anticipation, like the second before a lightning strike. The security guards didn't feel it. Not yet, but they would. The flight attendant closest to them swallowed hard. A teenage boy clutched his phone tighter. The man across the aisle leaned forward, heart pounding. Darius stayed right where he was, spine straight, hands resting lightly on his legs. He didn't need backup, but it was coming. And when it arrived, it wouldn't be loud. It would be still, unshakable, unspoken. and undeniable. The tension snapped when the older guard, the one with the square jaw and rigid stance, took a single step closer. "Sir, I'm telling you for the last time, stand up or we'll remove you." His voice was louder now, aiming not just at Darius but the entire row, trying to reassert control. Darius didn't move. His gaze didn't even flicker. "I paid for this seat. I have every right to be here," he said, measured and calm, but with weight behind each word. A few seats back, a passenger coughed, then silence. The cabin had gone still, as if the plane itself were holding its breath. The younger officer shifted his stance, unsure. He looked around, maybe expecting support, maybe hoping someone would speak up on their behalf. But the support wasn't coming from where he thought. It started with a man in row 12 who stood slowly, almost casually as if stretching his legs. He didn't speak, just fixed his eyes on the guards. Another man rose near the bulkhead, then a third further back by the lavatories. Each one moved with quiet certainty, like this wasn't the first time they'd stood when it mattered. Darius didn't turn to look. He didn't need to. He knew those men, not by sight, but by silence. These were his brothers, not by blood, but by fire. The kind of man who knew what it meant to carry someone out of hell and keep walking. The guards didn't know it yet, but the cabin wasn't theirs anymore. The balance had shifted, not through force, not through shouting, but through presence. The kind that doesn't need a uniform to command respect. The kind that tells you without a word that this man won't stand alone. Not today, not ever. Passengers were watching now, but most didn't know exactly what they were seeing. It looked like a seating dispute, the kind that happens on planes more often than anyone admits. But something deeper was unfolding. A woman in her 60s, sitting 2 rows across, began recording with trembling hands. A college student next to her whispered, "That guy didn't do anything." A businessman in first class leaned into the aisle, squinting toward the commotion. Darius remained still, but behind his calm was something sharp, alive. He had spent years navigating pressure, the kind that comes with bullets flying and men screaming. But what tightened his chest now wasn't fear. It was familiarity. He'd seen this before, in different forms, different places. The feeling of being singled out, of being told to comply, while others were allowed to simply exist. One of the men now standing, tall, dark-skinned, with a sleeve tattoo peeking from under his hoodie, adjusted his stance and subtly nodded once. That nod wasn't just recognition, it was a signal. Another man, older and broad-shouldered, cracked his knuckles softly and shifted his weight. No one gave commands. They didn't need to. A rhythm was setting in, unspoken but shared. Even the flight attendants felt it. The woman at the front, who just finished safety checks, clutched the back of a seat and glanced toward the cockpit. Inside the cabin, something invisible had changed. A child in row 10 stopped fidgeting. A teen lowered his earbuds. The passengers didn't have the full story, but they could sense it. The wrongness. The weight of it. Like watching someone be asked to leave their own home. And still, Darius said nothing. Still, the guards stood firm. But so did the silence around them. It wasn't empty anymore. It was full. Full of awareness, of witnessing, of people deciding where they stood. No shouting, no panic. Just the slow, gathering storm of a moment pushing towards something inevitable. And underneath it all, a single, growing truth. This wasn't about a seat. It never was. It broke with a gesture, small, sharp, and too close. The older guard, jaw clenched, reached down toward his belt, not for a weapon, but with just enough force to feel like a threat. In that instant, the air inside the plane changed. One of the men who had been standing stepped forward into the aisle. His movement wasn't rushed, but deliberate, like gravity had shifted in his direction. "That's far enough," he said, voice steady but edged like steel under velvet. The guard froze, eyes flicking to the man's face, then to the 3 others now standing behind him. No badges, no raised voices, but their bodies spoke, trained, precise, immovable. The younger officer looked around, suddenly unsure, his fingers twitching near his radio. Another man stepped forward from the back, blocking the aisle without a word. His stare alone seemed to press the room still. Darius didn't move. He didn't turn, but a muscle in his jaw flexed just once. He recognized the sound behind the silence, the way brothers in arms fill the space without being called. The passengers felt it too. Even those who didn't know what they were witnessing could feel the weight of it. One woman quietly reached over and pulled her daughter's hand into her lap. A man near the emergency exit mouthed something to the woman beside him. "Are they military?" She just nodded. The guard who'd reached down drew his hand back, slowly, like whatever authority he thought he had now felt uncertain. And it was. The balance had tipped, not because of force, but because of presence. Because four men stood like stone, like they'd stared down worse than this and walked through it. The guard looked to the front of the plane, maybe hoping for backup, maybe hoping for a reason to stop. None came. The plane was quiet, not because people were afraid, but because respect had taken over. The kind that doesn't need to be explained. The kind you only recognize when you've seen it in real time. And everyone on that flight had just seen it. Clear as day. The captain finally stepped out of the cockpit, a tall man with silver at his temples and tension around his eyes. He scanned the scene, took in the posture of the guards, the silence of the cabin, the four men standing like a quiet wall behind seat 8C. His gaze settled on Darius, then flicked to the others, and something in his expression shifted. He knew exactly what he was looking at. "What's the issue here?" he asked, calm but clipped. The lead guard cleared his throat. "This passenger refused to relocate. We had a reassignment issue." The captain didn't respond right away. Instead, he looked to Darius. "Sir, you have your boarding pass?" Without a word, Darius held it up. The captain stepped closer, glanced at it, and nodded. "8C, confirmed." He turned back to the guards. "Then this passenger stays in his seat." The words landed like a gavel. One sentence and the whole cabin breathed again. A few people clapped quietly. The guards stiffened, but the shift was irreversible now. The authority had returned to the right hands. The captain added, "If there's a problem, I'll deal with it through protocol, but this passenger isn't moving." The guards exchanged a look. The younger one stepped back. The older one held his position for a beat longer, jaw tight, then turned away. Darius didn't gloat. He didn't even change expression. Behind him, the four men still stood, but their stances softened slightly. They had done what they came to do. The cabin remained hushed, but it was no longer from discomfort. It was reverence. The passengers weren't just witnessing the end of a conflict. They were witnessing the right ending. One built on dignity, not dominance. On facts, not force. The moment didn't call for celebration. It called for acknowledgement. And everyone on that plane had just seen a man hold his ground without raising his voice and watch the world adjust around him. 15 minutes later, just before the plane pushed back from the gate, the captain's voice came over the intercom. Not rushed, not routine. "Ladies and gentlemen, I want to acknowledge an earlier situation on board," he began, his tone deliberate. "We regret any discomfort or confusion caused to our passengers, particularly Mr. Holt, a decorated veteran of the United States Marine Corps." A hush fell over the cabin. The message was clear, and it wasn't just for Darius. It was for everyone who had watched, recorded, or sat in silence wondering what they should have done. "We thank Mr. Holt for his service and his patience," the captain continued, "and we thank all those who stand up when it matters." A few passengers started clapping, then more. The applause spread from front to back, not thunderous, but steady, controlled, like the energy that had filled the cabin earlier was now finding release. Darius didn't stand. He didn't wave. He simply nodded once, a quiet acknowledgement to the crew and the passengers. Behind him, the four men who had risen now sat still, their expressions unchanged. They hadn't acted for praise, and they didn't look for it now. They just returned to being passengers, invisible again. But the cabin saw them differently. And it saw Darius differently too. Not because he demanded it, but because he never did. A little boy across the aisle leaned over to his mother and whispered, "Is he a hero?" She didn't answer right away. She just looked at Darius and then back at her son. "Yes, baby," she said softly. "Yes, he is." By the time the plane touched down in Atlanta, the video had already started circulating. Someone posted a short clip to social media, Darius sitting calm in his seat, the guards hovering, and the four silent figures rising one by one like sentinels. The caption was simple. He didn't even raise his voice. Within hours, it had been shared thousands of times. News outlets picked it up. Morning shows ran the footage, and the comments poured in. Veterans, flight attendants, ordinary people who knew exactly what they were watching. The airline released a statement later that day, apologizing for the incident and promising a full review. The two security officers involved were placed on immediate leave pending investigation. But the men who mattered most didn't speak to cameras. The four SEALs declined interviews. Darius turned down a request for a televised appearance. When pressed by a reporter outside baggage claim, he simply said, "I got where I needed to go. That's what matters. No revenge, no spotlight, just resolution." And while the world buzzed with reactions, reposts, and op-eds, Darius disappeared into the flow of arrivals like any other traveler. Except he wasn't just any traveler anymore. Not to the people on that flight, not to the millions who saw what happened, and not to the ones who might have been in his seat one day. The justice wasn't in headlines or hashtags, it was in the shift. In fact, next time, someone might pause before making the same mistake. Because now everyone knows, some men don't need to speak to be heard. The next evening, Darius sat in the front row of a small auditorium tucked into the heart of a college campus in Atlanta. The stage was modest, the lighting soft, but to him it might as well have been Carnegie Hall. His daughter Ava stepped into view with her violin in hand and a nervous smile that melted the moment her eyes met his. That single look steadied her, grounded her. She raised her instrument, took a breath, and began to play. The music filled the room, delicate and sure, and Darius felt something loosen in his chest. Not relief, but release. After the final note faded, the audience erupted in applause. Ava bowed, scanned the crowd again, and beamed at her father. Later, outside the hall beneath a stretch of quiet evening sky, she ran into his arms. "You made it," she whispered, squeezing him tight. Darius smiled. "Told you I would." She pulled back, searching his face. "I saw the video." He held her gaze, steady and kind. "Didn't go there to be seen, just to keep a promise." Ava nodded slowly. "You didn't have to say anything," she said. "And still, everyone listened." He didn't answer. He didn't need to. They walked to the car in silence, hand in hand, the kind that speaks volumes without sound. On the drive home, Ava rested her head on the window, and Darius glanced at her, the streetlights brushing soft light across her face. It wasn't just a trip anymore. It was a moment sealed into both of them. A lesson passed down not through words but through presence. In a world full of noise, his silence had spoken loudest, and now she carried it with her. Some stories don't need a headline to matter. They unfold in everyday places, a plane seat, a school hallway, a moment between strangers. And in those moments, we're reminded that strength doesn't always sound like shouting. Sometimes it looks like a man sitting still while the world tries to push him aside. Sometimes it looks like four others rising, not with noise, but with knowing. What happened on that flight wasn't just about a seat or a policy. It was about how dignity holds its ground. It was about how honor doesn't age and how respect, when earned in silence, echoes longer than words ever could. We live in a world that rushes to respond, to react, to go viral. But maybe what we need most are more people willing to stand quietly beside what's right, without needing to be asked, without needing the spotlight. Because real courage isn't always loud. It's steady, it's present, it's unshakable. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to be reminded that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is stay exactly where you are and let the truth speak for itself.